No. All right. So, if it is possible, if the students can respond, no, it would be nice. So, you are from Kerala or you're from across India, right? So, coming to this paper, that is constructing gender through arts and media, we have actually got four main blocks. One is gender and literature, then we'll be doing gender, film, and cinema, then gender and performance, and the last one, visualizing gender. So, today we'll be doing the first module. It's about gender and literature. So, is there anyone with a background of literature for your graduation BA courses? Did anyone do literature for your degree programs? No? All right. So I know this too. If you have a literature background, it will be much easier. But nevertheless, you don't have to worry. The module, source materials that you have, it's pretty easy. And we'll be talking about how we can connect literature and gender and different ways of reading and interpreting texts, literature, especially by women, about women, and then different waves of writing about women, about men, about everything in general. Then a few critical approaches like feminism and deconstruction. So to begin with, we'll be talking about how or the ways in which we can read certain literature, because it's not that it's not a reading a particular text, whether it is written by man, woman, or whoever it is, a particular narrative or particular text, reading involves, it's an active process. No, it is not a passive thing. It is an active process where many things come to play. Our own interpret, when you interpret a particular text, when you try to read, make a close reading analysis of a text, our own socio-political background, the ideologies that we believe in, and the ideologies that we are under control, there is an hegemony which actually controls the way in which we read a particular text. So the first module, it's about the ways of reading and interpreting. And before that, we'll take a look at the perspectives from language. It's about the language use. So the first concept that we get to understand is about the language used by men and language used by women and how it is different. So there were philosophers and other psychologists who came up with different theories, as saying that even linguists, they came up saying that women writers, they used a certain set of adverbs, they use certain set of grammatical structures. The way women used to write is different from that of a man, and so on. So nevertheless, the basic, what we don't find, though there are a lot of philosophers and psychologists who talks about such theories, they come up with certain theories saying that the vocabulary used by women are different, the vocabulary used by men are different, and so on. And how deeper is the understanding of certain ideas, feelings, and concepts which are expressed by women, and which is more, no, more, it's different. And the thing is that when you take a particular text and read it, there are two things that we have to take into consideration. One is the obvious thing, the grammar, structure, vocabulary, the linguistic features of a writing, and then the deeper understanding of the text, the meaning, the feelings, or what is actually being said, apart from the grammatical structures. So these are the two things that we look into while we read a text. So that is one point that we have to keep in mind. While reading, we look at two different things. So psychologists and other philosophers and linguists, they try to formulate that how a man uses a language and a woman uses a language, both are different. Do you understand? All right. So, and then moving on to that, we have a certain set of portrayals, examples from time immemorial, how certain words are used very differently. For example, when you take a look at, there is one example given here. It's about the concept taken from Christianity about the virgin womb. Certain dichotomies, virgin womb image. You have the image of Mother Mary, who is pure, who stands for chastity, purity, and so on. And you have Mary Magdalene, who who stands opposite to that. There are certain binary oppositions when we talk about certain labels, images used by men, and even in the men, women, and the portrayal of women and men as well. So it's about the language thing, how certain dichotomies come to play. And when we come to the point of that is on language level, how certain words, phrases are different when we use a particular language and write about women or whatever. The structures, vocabulary that we use is different. And from the perspective of literature, when we talk about certain writings, when we take into consideration certain women's writings, what we find is, there are certain feminist theories like Helen Sissel, Adrienne Rich, who talks about women's writing, how women used to write and how their imagination transcend and transform certain experience. It has to, where a woman is writing, there is a much bigger challenge, because they have to question, they have to challenge and to conceive an alternative, right? Because alternative reality, because the critics, they say language actually creates reality. You have to be thorough with this particular concept, that is, it's not that reality is out there. Whatever is it, that reality is created by language. Do you understand? So what happens is that, right from time immemorial, that reality was controlled by the patriarchal society, because men were using language and creating this reality. So when women started to write, so they had a challenge of using the same language which men used to create a reality based on their hegemonic and ideological concerns. So we have to defy. When a woman is trying to write, she has to defy all this. It's a very huge task of defying all these things and to create a reality which is feminine in nature, which is free from all these patriarchal ideologies. So where so it's a huge challenge for them to conceive an alternative language, to create an alternative reality through their writings, through their feminist writings, women's writings. An alternative reality has to be um, formulated. You have to be free to play around with the notion that day might be a night, or love might turn into hate. It's a huge thing to defy whatever was being already established by the patriarchal society, has to be deconstructed. And when we come to another critic, Helen Sissel, who feels that it is impossible to define a feminine practice of writing. Why? Because this is an impossibility that will remain, for this practice has never been theorized, because nobody talks about how a woman writes or how a woman can create meanings. It is never theorized, it is enclosed, and nobody coded it, because men's writings were criticized and critiqued throughout the centuries, and women's writings, women's creativity was not even recognized from time immemorial. So when you take into account the Elizabethan age, for example, during the Shakespearean times, when England became the nest of singing birds, and everybody was writing something. Every poet was having a sonnet or a song. You have Shakespeare, Sydney University, with many writers came up with the writings, but you don't find a single woman writer during that period. Or during neoclassical age, medieval ages. Why? Because this, even during this Elizabethan age, these Oxford and Cambridge universities were prevalent, but women were denied those opportunities to articulate what is inside their hearts, minds. They couldn't articulate. They were denied opportunities of education. So their reality was entirely different. So it is not theorized or enclosed or coded. And we find philosophers like Sappho, Homer. They talk about marriage. You have Plato, Aristotle, many philosophers from time immemorial. They talk about women, their families, female sexuality, and so on. But they don't actually or allow women to come up and talk about all these things. They were just a keeper of home or a companion for men, keep and who has who is there inside the house, and we have that image. And then on the opposite, we have the new woman who gradually came up, realizing that she should have the measure of freedom and a role over and above what had been prescribed by the patriarchal society. So this is so because I hope you have understood, right? So the way women is writing is different, and also women's writings were not theorized or coded, or there is no such thing as, because women were not allowed to write something or create something creatively. Excuse me. So when we talk about reading literature by women, so one thing that we come up or we come across is the rewriting or reframing. So there are a lot of revisions when we take a look at the history of English literature or world literature or Indian literature. We have certain revisions or reframing. A kind of adaptation, you can say. So in many texts, like for example, Jane Eyre, Tempest, this. Many plays by other plays by Shakespeare. So we have certain adaptations, film adaptations, and so on. And also during this modern era, we have certain adaptations or revisions of those texts, from the perspective of women. Written by especially women. So the first example that we have to take a look at is Jane Eyre by excuse me, from the Western English literature. You have Jane Eyre, and there are other writings as well, Madame Bovary, excuse me. So these novels were revisioned or reframed in such a way that the main protagonist, the shift changed from the male protagonist to the female protagonist. Do you get the point? So, for example, in Jane Eyre, you have a character called Bertha Rochester. So, if you have free time and if you're interested in reading, if you're a voracious reader, you can read these works. Jane Eyre, it's very interesting. So, you have so there is this character Bertha Rochester who is considered to be mad, who is always there there at the in the attic. She's considered to be mad, and nobody actually bothers about her. And we have a revision of the same novel by Jean Rice, and the name of the novel is Wide Sargasso Sea. So in this, this novel is actually from the perspective of this mad Bertha Rochester, who is given the identity of Antoine, and how different it is, how differently this Antoine um, is represented compared to Bronte sisters, Jane Eyre's Bertha Rochester. We have a recreation of this Bertha Rochester in Wide Sargasso Sea. In Jane Eyre, we find this Bertha to be a voiceless character who is insane, who is locked up, and nobody actually bothers about him, locked up, and she's always locked up there. And Jean Rice tells the story that Bronte did not talk about. It is from the Bertha's point of view. So there's a change in the perspective. This Wide Sargasso Sea, and also you might be familiar with the play Tempest by Shakespeare, where the main protagonist is Prospero, and there is this Prospero's daughter Miranda, and the story moves on. Most of the story actually revolves around Prospero, but here we have a reworking of this Tempest. That is the Mama Day, which was published in 1993 by Gloria Naylor. So this is actually from the perspective of Miranda. The power is being given to Miranda. We find an empowered woman here, when we take a look at, when we read Tempest, you find a very meek and submissive Miranda who obeys Prospero and who immediately falls in love with Ferdinand and finally marries him. There is no choice given to her. So here we find Naylor's in Gloria Naylor's text. Miranda is a matriarch who rules over not only her own household but also the entire island. She's portrayed as such a powerful character in this novel. And in coming to India, also we find such reworkings in Vimojanam. It's a Tamil story which was published in 1943, where you have the reframing or re-representation of Ahilya. I think you know the story about Ahilya and Rishi Gautama. So we have a retelling how how this woman is given voice. Ahilya is given voice in this particular work, and also in Saket, which was published in 2008 by Maithili Sharan Gupta. Again, there is a shift in the perspective here. This is from the perspective of Urmila, Lakshman's wife, who is not given much voice in the traditional narratives. And this is about how she perceives the reality. And when we come to other writers, like other stories in you are familiar with Ulysses and the love story of Ulysses and Penelope. In Homer's epics, you find this Ulysses, a warrior, a king, who has left his wife and country back there, and he went roaming around, fighting with others, engaging in battles and adventure, while his faithful wife is back there for 10, 20 years back there in the country, being chased. She didn't marry anybody. She was waiting for her husband. But she was not sure whether he will come back or he is gone forever, he's dead or he's alive. But nevertheless, she waited there patiently. This Penelope is an epitome of patience, of love, epitome of the faithful wife. So we have this reworking by Australian poet Kate Loveland, who wrote about Penelope from the Penelope's point of view. And it's actually very interesting how this shift changed from Ulysses to Penelope. So in Western literature, Indian literature, in world literature in general, we find this shift or reworking of the traditional narratives, where traditional narratives are considered the men to be superior, and you have revisions where the voiceless, the marginalized, the suppressed woman was given voice. Did you understand? So we have seen how language can be used to define and shape gender, and how it is used as an instrument to assert dominance, to create a reality over a particular group, or in order to relegate a particular group into inferiority, whatever. Because language creates reality. Language has the power to do that, and language can be used in literature also to convey abstractions of thought and feelings through, sometimes even with just a single word. So how language is used to create reality is very clear, I guess, right? And then moving on, what we find is so after the ways of reading and interpreting, so that is different, and we imagine things and revisions things. Then ways of writing and reading literature from the perspective of gender, that is different from the actual reading or from the casual reading of any narratives. And also ways of writing by women is also important, and also it is different, and their experience is also different. That is what we'll be saying next. So after these different ways of reading and interpreting literary text, we'll move on to conceptualize women's writing. So when we take a look at women's writing, there are certain things that controls or that dominates these women's writings. One is resistance. It's an important drop in women's writing. Resistance to the oppression, resistance to the patriarchal society, the norms and societies, the weight of custom and tradition which weigh women down. So they resist. There is this resistance that we find in women's writing. And then there is a struggle to create their own reality, struggle to create a new reality, struggle to find a literary space for women, because from time immemorial this literature is actually controlled, is ruled by men. So it's a huge struggle for a woman as a writer to find a literary space, to find a niche for them to start writing. And no, because from time immemorial they were invisible and unsung, their voice was not heard. So when the women started to write, it was a huge struggle for them to find a literary space. And then another major hindrance that they found was censorship. Formal censorship as well, and informal censorship from the first, from family, from friends, from society, from religion. And the censorship is also another, they have to face a censorship. And this marginality on one hand, and reconceptualization of the reality on the other hand. So they have to actually focus on all this. They just can't, if a man is about to write, they just have to write about this, focus on their creativity and to finding the right phrase and so on. But a woman, when she sits to write, there are so many things that comes to play. Her struggle, her a fight to find the space, and their conflict, how they want to conceptualize a new literary canon to create a new reality opposing the unequal, or the discrimination that he feels. She cannot concentrate just on literary creativity. Just creativity is not enough for a woman. There are sort of things that they come to play. And then about the last stage, about marketability, or about finding the right publishers. And because initially women were not allowed to publish, or publish their works. When we take a look at Emily Dickinson, the poetry of Emily Dickinson and others, what we find is, many of these Bronte sisters, for example, George Eliot. So these early writers, they used to write because they had this creativity in them. They wanted to write something, and they wrote it. And fearing the society, many works were actually burned by themselves. They themselves burned their works. Fearing that the society, their family will come across those writings and will censor them, will portray them as unchaste, as promiscuous. They will be an outcast. So they themselves actually destroyed their works. And when we come to the modern era, again we find this Bloomsbury group coming up with the Hogarth press and so on. Women were encouraged to publish and market their works. And coming to this marketing thing, what we find is, about how certain works were popular, like for example popular romance or chick lit, for example. One second, hold on for a minute. All right. So about marketability, there is a huge difference in the taste of men or women. They don't prefer writing by women. And if women are writing, it should be popular. romance or chick lit. They can't be writing about serious issues like religion or politics, and people can't digest. When they talk about philosophy and so on, it is difficult because mother, women could be envisaged as wives, mothers, and sweethearts. There are and there are certain genres or kinds of literature which are women only. For example, like these popular romances, and even if a man is writing, they will write in the write with a female pseudonym, because that is being always branded as women only. Okay, those writings are by women. So they are relegated to that status of writing. And again, moving on to the same concept, what we find is, about the author. When we talk about the author, when in the 19 in the modern era, we find different theories of reading coming up. There is this feminist theory, different readings of, with the advent of post-structuralism, so many theories came up. And there is this one theory, it's about the death of author by Roland Barthes. So that's a very path-breaking theory as far as the Western criticism was concerned, because till then the belief was that the author is a god. Author has the authority of a god because author is a creator of meaning. So you are writing a textbook. So who has the monopoly over that textbook? That is you, right? The author who has written Hamlet, that is Shakespeare. Shakespeare has the monopoly, is the creator of Hamlet, creator of meaning for that text, Hamlet, right? The author was given power and authority. But with the advent of this theory by Roland Barthes, a French theorist, in the 1967, when he published this Death of the Author, what he was trying to formulate is that meaning is not confined or created by the author alone. So author has written, and then the role of that author is gone. The text is there, and it is the reader who creates meaning for that text. The ways of interpreting how the meaning lies in the reader and not with the author. I hope this meaning is clear, right? So it is the author, is the reader who creates meaning for a in a particular text. So this was a path breaking, and it actually gave much freedom for the reader to find meanings, because the reader can interpret a text in many ways. Not there is no one particular framework of reading a particular text. You can read from a feminist perspective, you can read from a Marxist perspective, you can make read a particular text from cultural studies perspective. There are different perspectives, different ways of reading a text, different meanings are there. So even a small poem will have different meanings for different people. So the way I explain or I interpret one symbol or imagery in a poem will be different from the way another person will interpret that imagery. So this death of an author, this particular theory was actually welcoming for all the critics, but women are as well. No, they accepted this, but later on, when they studied this theory so much, and they came up with a conclusion, or they made this formulation that this death of an author was actually mean it actually focused on women, because it was the time when women writers came up. So the male critics, or the male dominant critical thoughts, they couldn't accept, or they can't accept this women as an author, as a creator of meaning. So they brought out this new theory, that of the author. So there is no if a woman is writing or man is writing, nothing is important. So it actually leaves the woman who's the author from her rights over that text. So it was a so this theory was contested by many feminist writers, and they tried to bring out other theories, other ways of reading a particular text. For example, there are many critics that you can take a look at. That is Helen Sissel, Ellen Showalter, Adrian Rich, and so on. So Ellen Showalter, in her A Literature of Their Own in 1977, she talks about this women's writing as a subculture, a new culture, which doesn't conform to the dominant mainstream culture, came up, which talks about women's experiences and so on. And she makes an analysis of these women writers, starting from Bronte sisters and no, George Eliot and other writers of the Victorian era. She divided this women's writing into three major phases. The first one is the feminine phase, and the second one is the feminist phase, and the third one the female phase. So in the first one, that is the feminine phase, it was a phase of imitation. So these women writers, they try to imitate the genres used by men, the structure, the language used by men, and they try to, even they used male pseudonyms. For example, George Eliot, the Mary who used this male pseudonym to write. So it was an age of imitation. They try to imitate, or they try to write like men. That is the first stage. And moving from that first stage, that is the first one, that is the feminine stage, where they try to imitate the male authors. And the second stage, moving to the second phase, you have the feminist phase, where the writers, they try to they started struggling to carve out their own space. They fought against fought against this male domination. It was they from the it was during this era that women got this opportunity to vote. And their writings were characterized by resistance. So instead of imitating men, they resisted the male genres, they resisted the male dominance, and they tried to create a reality which was different. So the main concept or main theme that runs throughout is resistance. How they resisted the society, how they resisted the male dominant culture, religion, or politics. It's all about resistance. And finally, the last stage, it is from the 1920 onwards, we have the female phase, where imitation, where there is no imitation, there is no resistance. There you look to yours, to into your own self, your own identity. So women, it's about the self discovery of women. So that is the last phase, that is a female phase, where women started to engage in self discovery, a new stage of self awareness. And it is during this era a new kind of writing came up, when women started to look into themselves and write, and not imitating or not resisting something else, but their own life. They are talking about their own life, their own life and their own body and their own anatomy. And that is where we have this the significance of this new term comes to play, that is gynocritics or gynocriticism or gynotext. This, it was Ellen Showalter who formulated this thing, as the name suggests, gyno, something related to women, right? So the gynocritics or gynotext, which is exclusively by women, literature by women, the meaning, which is, it's just the scholarship concerned with woman as the producer of textual meaning, with history, with the history, themes, genres, and structures of literature by women alone. So that is the that is about gynocriticism. And then along this line, we have certain other terms as well. For example, écriture feminine, where it was created by writers like Helen Sissel and Lucy Irigaray, who talks about, again, it's about writing. Écriture means writing, which is feminine in nature. Écriture feminine, which is essentially female writing. So these critics like Helen Sissel and Lucy Irigaray, they talk about, it is in this article, The Laugh of the Medusa, where this term comes in. And she asserts that a woman must write herself, she has to look into herself, must write about women, and bring women to writing, from which they have been driven away as violently as from their bodies. So So another concept also comes in here. One is they were driven away from their writing. Women were denied this opportunity to write, and also they were driven away from controlling their own bodies. So their bodies were not, they never had the control over their bodies. Either they were the properties of their fathers, and after marriage they became properties of their husbands and lovers and so on. So they never owned their bodies. So writing or reclaiming the identity, reclaiming this creativity is like reclaiming their bodies as well. So that is where that is the main concept that we come up with. The is come up in this essay, The Laugh of Medusa by Helen Sisso and Lucy Irigaray. These critics, they talk about how women were driven away from writing as well as from their own bodies. So reclaiming their literary career is as important, or literary this talent is as important as getting control over their own bodies. So I hope this is clear. And then moving on to other famous writers like Judith Butler, we find there are path-breaking concepts where this Judith Butler, that is the name of the another. This critic, feminist critic, who talks about gender trouble. So in the essay Gender Trouble, she conceptualized gender as performative. It is gender is performed. You are not born with a particular gender. This gender is performing. It's performative. It is based on performance, and this result of heterosexual and heteronormative power structures in writings as well, right? So, what these literary theories try to argue is that writing cannot be separated from this act of reading and interpretations. When you write, writing and reading, both, writing as well as this creation and also interpreting this text, both are it's a binary. It's not a different binary oppositions. Both are not separated from each other. Both are connected. And then moving on to the concept of woman as a writer. So we have come across different struggles that a woman writer faces, and then different theories, which supports women writers, different phases in women's writing. And when we come to this 1920s, 1929, in 1929, it was Virginia Woolf who came up with another concept. She formulated a sister for Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is known to all, right? So he belonged to this Elizabethan era, and he wrote many plays, around 37 plays, four major plays, 154 sonnets, then two long narrative poems. He is an exceptionally gifted writer. And the critics say that he never blotted a single line. So when you those who are writing poetry or any other, they know that, right? When you write a poem, then you will think about the right phrase, and you will cut it, you will redraft it, you and again cut that, you will delete it, you will find another word for it. So it involves all these revisioning, editing, deleting, and omitting, and adding something. That's the process of writing. But what we know about Shakespeare is he never blotted a single line that he has written. For example, he sat down to write a Hamlet, and it came out whole, from his heart, because he was his creativity, his talent. He was talented, and also his way of doing things, how it came without any hindrances. There was nothing to hinder his creative process. The society there, or nothing actually hindered Shakespeare in his literary creation, composition. And Virginia Woolf, she tries to imagine a sister for Shakespeare who had the same talent like that of Shakespeare. I hope it is clear. So there was this fictional work by Virginia Woolf where she talks about A Room of One's Own. That is the title of that book, A Room of One's Own. So in this A Room of One's Own, she creates an imaginary sister for Shakespeare called Judith Shakespeare, who had the same literary talent. So, and she tries to envisage the fate of this young girl, Judith Shakespeare. So, what will be her life like? This Judith Shakespeare's. What we find this, this Shakespeare, right from the young age, was very wild, was enthusiastic, and because of poaching, he fled to London, and he had this act of taste in acting, wanted to act, and he went to a theater, became a stable boy there, and from that he got the opportunity to act in certain plays, and finally he started to write plays, and his plays were acted there, and finally he owned many theaters. His plays were performed before the Queen Elizabeth, and his fame uh, went everywhere. But the sister of Shakespeare, she never got the opportunity to learn. Like Shakespeare, she was denied the opportunity to learn. Nobody actually bothered her, and right out of maybe 16 or 17 years old, she was forced to get married, maybe to the nearest person, the woolstapler's son or so, and the father persuaded her to marry, and it actually broke her heart. She also wanted to write, act like Shakespeare, and she took the road to London, like Shakespeare, who has gone to London. But what is the fate that waits Judith Shakespeare? Somebody will make use of her, abuse her. So the actor manager there, she somebody made fun of her, and some took pity on her, and this one person became attached to her, and she finally became pregnant with that man's child, and finally she committed suicide, and she ended her life there, and she's buried there, near and in there. So that is the end of a woman who has the same creative genius as that of Shakespeare. So how the fate changed for Shakespeare and for Shakespeare's sister. So this is the situation, the real life situation that is portrayed. And but on the other, this is the real life of women during the Elizabethan age. They were beaten up, they were considered properties of their husbands after marriage, and before it was fathers. So they were never given money, or they were denied education. So that was the real life of women during Elizabethan age. But when we take a look at the literature of Elizabethan age, we find so many powerful women like Clytemnestra, Cleopatra. We have Gertrude, we have Lady Macbeth. So all these powerful women were portrayed during the Elizabethan age. But the reality of, or the actual reality of women during that age was different. So the women who are portrayed, who's reflected in literature as memorable women characters, they are exceptionally powerful compared to the women who are sordid, who are confined to this houses, and to whose creativity or nothing was given importance. They were denied opportunity. So that was the actual life of women, and compared to the women who were portrayed and who were reflected in literature. So she comes to this, Virginia Woolf comes to a conclusion that if a woman needs to write, if a woman wanted to write something, there are two major concepts, main things that a woman should possess. One is a room of her own. She should have a room of her own, where a space where she can sit quietly, where there is no trouble, where nobody bothers her, or where the barking of the dog, there is no interruption, there is no bark of the dog or nothing. Where they can sit quietly and contemplate and write whatever comes to their mind. They can put it in the piece of paper, a room of one's own, and then a private income and money. So these are the two things, room of her own and money of her own. So because they should have, if they are dependent on somebody else to for money for their livelihood, or if they have to work for something, work for their livelihood, they can't just sit and contemplate and write, right? So this a poem or a novel, it will not come as it is, right? It has to come out, and you have to rework it, you have to read it. So all these interpretation interruptions, will actually limit your creativity. So Virginia Woolf says a woman, in order to be a writer, needs to have a room of her own and also a private income of her own. So that is one theory or one main concept for a woman writer. And Adrian Rich and many other writers, they also come up with different things, how they need to own their bodies, in order to write something, they should own their bodies, they should be liberated from that as well. And we have examples from Indian literature as well. Women's writing in India from 600 BC, where in which Susi Tharu and K. Lalita, they outlined the fascinating story of a collection of poems, where you find Rathika. This from unlike the Radha Krishna story, where every time this Krishna is given, it's from the perspective of Krishna. Where here we find from the perspective of Radha. Radha is the dominant lover. But what happens is that it was censored and it was attacked by critics and it was later banned. Many, for a long time, it was banned. And that is one thing. Another next point that we'll be talking about, how women were denied opportunity to write on certain things. About there are three main things that we talk about that we need to write. Learn, that is religion, politics, and sex. You can wonder, there are so many other things you can write about, a flower in the garden or a lover or whatever you can write, but on religion, on politics and sex, men have the dominance and women are not supposed to write. So their writings were critiqued. There are no, if the women were wrote on these topics, it will be censored, it will be banned. People will come up with different interpretations, and the women's own sanity will be questioned, their chastity will be questioned. So so that is how this censorship is, censorship curb the creative process of women. These majority of women writers, they feel censored because they are not free enough to write anything or that they want, or they can't write like that. So that is another concept that we have to take a look at. So coming to this women's writing and then resistance, how the this element of resistance that we find throughout this works, when we take up from the colonial perspective, post-colonial situations also, we find how women try to resist the identity which has been put on them by by the male dominant white society, by the patriarchal society, by religion, institutionalized religion, and so on. So another example that we come about is black women's writing from from white feminism in her essay In Our Mother's Garden by Alice Walker. Again here we find like the writings of Lalita and Susi Taro, this Alice Walker again we find she tries to take the life or differentiate the life of white woman and black woman, because the white women no, they appear to be liberated and they have, and their problems are different. This black women, like like an Orient, she is doubly marginalized. She is marginalized on the basis of their gender. She is marginalized on the basis of their color as well, because she is black, because she is a woman. She is doubly marginalized. So the story or the experience of a black writer, black woman writer, is different from that of a white woman writer. So that is another thing. So the experience of the post-colonial country, countries where which was previous colonies like India, the developing nations, the Orient, those countries, the experience of women there, the experience of black writers, the experience of white women writers, all are different. But a common thread that we can see in all these women writings is this element of resistance. And so, all right. So then we move on to another concept that is about, we have seen these the fate of women writers and the main element that runs through. And in this, I'm not a woman writer, so that is no, that's another concept. We again, it's about the use of language. Yes, somebody has talked about Dalit women's writing. That is also different because they are also doubly marginalized. They are marginalized because they are um, women, and also because of their community, they are marginalized. Again, they are doubly marginalized, like the black women writers. So it is true when we talk about the Dalit women's experience, the tribal women's experience, that is entirely different. And also that they are also marginalized and oppressed, doubly oppressed. So next concept is that about the term woman writer, because when we talk about writer, what do you think? It's about a male writer. Usually, the image is that of a male writer. And when we talk about, there are certain words like actor. Usually we are actor and actresses, hero, heroines, and then there is a shift. You shouldn't use actresses for women. All are actors. There is this shift coming up. So likewise, women now say that we shouldn't be called as women writers. There is no need for that. A woman who is a writer is a writer. There is no need for using this phrase woman writer. Just a writer is enough, because they deny this, because this denial serves to distance them from a politically correct, or because what do you call is, they also, women also want to claim this universality as a writer, because maybe it was men who, we don't know how this particular phrase came up, but this was popularized, this term woman writer was popularized. But the thing is that this universal concept of a writer is always rests with men, and they don't want to share that universality to women. They cannot think about that. It's a patriarchal, a hegemonic control over this term, over this language use, about women writer. So that is why there is this term used, women writer. And in a in this stage of resistance, like this women, they deny to be called as a woman writer. They also want to be called as a writer. Doris Lessing, Shashi Deshpande, all of them, they dismiss this concept as women writers. They are also writers, not women writers, but writers. So in many anthologies of women's poetry, they insist that these poets should be this rather than using this woman poet, the term poet should be used, not a woman poet but poet. She wrote that art is art, and to separate writings, paintings, musical compositions based on sexes is to emphasize values that are not art. So in art, if you're an artist, there is no need to use a female artist or a woman artist, painter or whatsoever. That universal term has to be used. So it's not that other writers, like there is another very prominent Jewish, Russian Jewish writer, who says, Natalie Saron, who says, when I write, I am neither a man nor a woman nor a dog nor a cat, and I am a writer. So this universal image of a writer has to be bestowed to women or men or from any other community, whether they belong to LGBTQ or any community, they are writers. There is no need to differentiate based on that. So that is another main point that we should be looking at. And then about genre, gender, and market. So we actually touched upon this marketability thing, how certain genres are gender specific. You have epic, always epic, sonnet, and a dramatic monologue or whatever. So that is always associated with men. And there are certain, so only certain genres are associated with women, like chicklet, popular romances. For example, this Mills and Boone publishers, they assumed actually it was written by men, but they assumed the title of women, so that because that is expected only of women. That is the concept. In order to market such popular romances, cheap romances, those were written under the name of women. And men, they are too noble to write about such things. There is a popular belief that is running. So there are certain genres which men can write, or only men could write, the patriarchal belief. And women can write only of certain things, and they shouldn't be talking about religion, politics, or sex, and they should be talking about maybe romance and what is happening in certain households and so on. So that is the one thing. And about the marketability, how in contemporary market, these popular romances and chiclets are classified as classified as a popular command commercial, and these are written by women writers. And the writings of, serious writings like that of George Eliot, or other writings of Bronte sisters, they were not being accepted like which like like other popular fiction which is written by other people. So I hope you might have understood, how this marketable market, how this author is important in marketing certain genres or different kinds of literature. So the last part is about the certain critical approaches. There are many approaches that you can follow in order to decode a text. Feminism, deconstruction, Marxism, post-colonialism, the subaltern studies, film, and many things are there. And the two main concepts that we will be discussing, that is there prescribed for your studies, is one is feminism, and the other one is deconstruction. So these critical approaches actually, they try to bring up different meanings, new meanings, hidden meanings in a particular text. So we might superficially read a novel and we'll let go, and thinking that that story is very funny, or whatever is that, sad, or whatever. But if you make a close reading to it, reading of that text from a critical perspective, based on Marxism or post-colonialism, we find certain nuances, certain things, hidden things, which are hidden ideologies, which actually control these characters, which control the meaning of a particular text. So that is why, that is where these critical approaches are important. It gives a new set of meanings to a particular text. Do you understand? All right. So or maybe the first, which you need to know, it's about feminism. Feminism as a critical strategy. So there are different meanings to this particular term. Politically, there is this feminist movement, and like we have seen, in literary phase, literary writing, in women's writing, we find this feminism coming into play, where we have three periods. One is feminist, and the third is the female phase. So there are different distinctions and different the interpretations for this term feminism. So feminism as a movement emerged, for liberating women from the oppression, from the political, social, and financial and economic oppression faced by women, to reclaim their identity So there so that is how this form this term as a feminism as a movement became very popular. This distinctions are very subtle. One is this feminist, female and feminine. We have seen this from the literary perspective. So one is a political position. This feminist is a political position. Why? While feminine is a culturally defined characteristics. She appears very feminine. We talk about certain people like that, right? She appears very feminine, and some girls, they appear tomboyish. So it is culturally defined. The feminist feminine traits, they are all culturally created. The way you dress, the style, the way you smile. You smile very in a very feminine manner, and so on. It is a matter of culture. You are not born that way. You are not born to smile that way or to dress in that particular way. It is culturally defined. But the female, that is that is the phase. That is a matter of biology, how you are born as a woman, with female characteristics, features, which enables you to be a mother, to be a wife, and so on. So these are terms, especially the relationship between these biological, that is the natural, and the cultural, raises questions of socialization, of conditioning, and is an important area of discussion in gender studies, because one is culturally created. This feminine face is culturally created, while the female one is the natural one. You are born with it. And further, the term feminism is increasingly referred to as a gender in gender studies, which is often preferred a term in certain critical discourse, as it reflects the focus on construction and formation of gender and sexualities across the cultures. So these issues on feminism, these different phases, and all these are all discussed in the Room of One Song, as I have already told you about, by Virginia Woolf, and The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, that is in 1949. So it is by with this book, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, we find the second wave of feminism, which discuss the othering of women in history and culture, how women are always considered as the other, not the mainstream. No, they cannot be accepted as the main one. No, the other one who is always there in the background. We come across that image of women in history, in culture, in literary texts, and so on. And other feminist writers like Elaine Showalter, in a literature of her own, British women novelists from Bronte to Lessing, where she talks about phases. That is the one that we have discussed earlier. That is the feminine phase, feminist phase, and female phase. So all these are theoreticians, feminist theoreticians like Virginia Woolf, Simone de Beauvoir, Adrienne Rich, Alice Walker, Judith Butler. They're all feminist theorists who came up with different set of theories, different set of critical approaches to read a text written by women and also men. So all these theories help us to delve deeper into, or get through these critical approaches, we get a deeper understanding about women, deeper understanding about women's writing. All right. So, so these critical approaches help us to focus on read a particular character. For example, we have Hamlet, and we have different ways of reading Hamlet. But if you read within the lens, or by the through the lens, these critical approaches are certain lenses. What does this lens help us? You have seen lenses, right? So when you the read through, or when you look at a particular thing through a lens, it is there, right? So these lens, through the lens, we get an enlarged vision of these lines, right, of the letters or so. Likewise, these critical approaches, feminist theories, they they are like lenses. We can read these literary texts through these lenses, and it gives a different meaning. Like we get an enlarged vision of these words when you read under a lens. These critical approaches, these critical theories like Écriture Feminine, the theories by Elaine Showalter, Judith Butler on gender trouble, on abject, and all these critical approaches by feminist theorists, they give a new approach to us. They give a new approach, new meaning, deeper understanding of the text, deeper understanding of a character as well. So moving on to these critical approaches, because when we read through this text, the themes, genres, the structures of writing by women, they take us into a different level. The psychodynamics of female creativity is revealed. The trajectory of individual or the collective female career, how they are inspired. Everything turns. Mean. Gives we have different meaning to all those things. Once again. All right. So these theorists, like no Elaine Showalter, who talks about, they bring there are different set of theories by formulated by these different theorists, on biological, linguistic, psychoanalytical, cultural. So some talked about feminism, women's experience and culture studies, and some talked about feminism and psychoanalysis. How psychoanalysis of Freud and Lacan, who talked about the workings of our mind, and how that comes to play in reading a particular text by woman by a woman. So Ellen Showalter, she talks about, she asserts the alienation of a woman trapped in man-made language. So that is another concept, another theory, because language is man-made. That is what traditionally Dale Spender and they talks about language as a man-made and is tainted by male ideology, because we have history, the term history, that is his story, story of man conquering right from time immemorial. So all these terms are gender specific, and also they are controlled by men or male dominant. So the language is man-made. So women take up this task of using a man-made language to express their own reality. So it actually chokes and silences them, according to Shelling Showalter, because you are using a tool which is made and which is desirable for a man's use and not for a woman. So a need for using a counter language is important. Or these writers like Ellen Showalter, Helen Sissou, they talk about formulating a new language which is in fact which is feminine in nature, which talks about female anatomy. So this creating a new language is important for them, important for as far as a woman is concerned. So that is another thing, because all these terms, genres, vocabulary, they are all phallocentric, or the structure is phallocentric in nature, where men has the control over it. And then it was Julia Kristeva who talked about this use of new language, in the desire in language, where you have to move away from the man-made language and create a new reality for your own. So why is language used? why do you write? To create a new reality for yourself. So for that, you have to create a new phase, because in psychoanalysis, Freud and later on Lacan, they came up with different phases, imaginary and the symbolic. It is like, these phases, one is, it's like one symbolizes women and one symbolizes men. So this is symbolic phase, which is being compared, which is considered to be the dominant phase. It is always man controlled by a man, male dominant thing. And the imaginary phase, which is considered to be a flexible thing, which is feminine in nature. So when you write, when you use a language, it has to actually break this dichotomy of the imaginary and symbolic, like Lacan was talking about. So in the new language, this dichotomy has to be broken. Only then a new symbolic order, a new primal space, free of the symbolic order or law of the father, or law of the father, or law of the god. That is the that is a man-made structure, man-made rules that controls a language. So that would be changed or questioned, and that and you can create a language which is essentially maternal in nature. That is how Lucy Irigaray, another feminist writer, says. She links the word matter etymologically to maternity. This matter is irreducible to male conceptual rationality. It is outside and making possible, yet impossible to assimilate this male reason. It is not about male reason or male genre or nothing. It is about the maternal instinct that helps you to create a new reality for women, a new identity and experience of their own, forever apart from the male power and male concepts. So a new language has to be developed, which will fully express female creativity, female experience, feminine nature. So, in actually, you have a very in-depth study of the psychoanalytical study. This in-depth knowledge. You will have a study in study on psychoanalysis in paper 1, where you get to know about these phases, symbolic phase and imaginary phase. And here it is being connected to feminism. That is where that is how we'll use this term symbolic and imaginary here. So these are certain critical terms that you have to come up with, and then there is this another term formulated by Elaine Showalter. We have discussed that is gynocentric or gynocritic. Gyno itself, relates to women. So this gynocentric criticism would also attempt to situate women with respect to certain variables of literary culture, such as modes of production, distribution, and everything which has been different from men and which is particular to women alone. And the idea of women's culture as a foundation for a revisionist, a woman-centered inquiry of the past. How these women's perspective, how we thought saw the recreation of Ahilya, recreation of Urmila, revision of Penelope. So how we recreate a new inquiry into the past, from the perspective of gynocriticism or gynocentrism, from the perspective of women. And then moving on to the conclusion. So this neglect of women's writing and women's culture was actually, right from the time immemorial, women's writing, women's creativity, everything was actually neglected. And this Susi Tharu and Lalita in writing in women writing in India in 1990, the book published in 1991, discuss about this prevalent cultures of writing, reading, interpretation in the context of nationalist and reform movements in India. So that particular period is very important as far as women's writings is concerned, because this nationalism actually gave voice to many women writers to come up with their creativity. For example, Sarojini Naidu, who talked about. So this nationalism was yet another movement of reformation in India, where women as a writer came to the forefront. They foreground the narratives of writers who were, hidden from history, and their traditions of women's writing, especially, the stories of, interestingly, Ambe's story of Squirrel, which gives a very new outlook to female archivist and so on. Then about, so this is how, different, these are the ways of reading and interpreting. So these critical approaches actually help us to read and interpret these texts. So another thing that we come across while rereading these canon, or rereading the text that was already there, Hamlet or other famous writings, we find a thread of, even in Shakespeare's writing, Mark Twain's writing, Melville's writing, Hemingway's, we find a thread of misogyny or a hatred towards women. Uh, most of these famous writers, when we take a look at Hamlet, when you look into Macbeth, Mark Twain's works, we find this thread of misogyny in these works. So this feminist criticism, or this gyno criticism, is important, so that there is a revision of reading can be exercised. How this reading can differ, and a new meaning comes up with. And then the question of difference, or how it becomes, how these critical approach to gender extended in scope and ambit and became more eclectic, and the boundaries, how how these critical theories became more porous, in the sense that this criticism drew upon Marxism, structuralism. We were talking about feminism, which actually tried to help us to read these feminist texts, women's texts, and also the canons in a different perspective. And then we have this connection of these feminist criticism to other theories, that is to Marxism. It has there are feminist Marxist readings, its connection to structuralism, its connection to psychoanalysis. That is where we get the terms imaginary and symbolic. Feminism's connection to linguistics. So literature now is no longer confined to a particular literary theory. We have different theories, critical approaches coming together. So this feminist critical practice is now supported by these readings as well. So Marxist readings of feminist Marxist readings will talk about the oppression of women in a different manner. Based on Althusser's theories on ideology and so on. We'll get a new meaning. So all these critical approaches, whether it is feminist reading alone or other readings as well, it will give a new what do you call approach to the narratives under study. So, and then moving on to this feminist criticism, like I said, black feminism, womanism, non-white feminism, or multicultural feminisms in the Western context, and the rise of Dalit women writings, of the oppressed and downtrodden groups, Dalit literature and feminism in the Indian context. So it takes a different set of theories as far as these new theories are concerned, new concepts are concerned. So these examples, like Alice Walker's work In Search of Our Mother's Garden towards a Black feminist criticism by Barbara Smith. We find the new readings. The suggested. They suggested a lesbian reading of Toni Morrison's Sula. Toni Morrison's Sula is a very important work, and there is a feminist reading. And then now we have a new black feminist reading of Sula, which will give a new meaning to that particular text. So all these texts, all these theories, they give a new outlook. For example, Adrian Rich saw this archetypal image of no, when we you can take a look at all these examples given here in this text. We find many examples on different readings. Even under feminist reading, we have got many subdivisions or certain subversions that you can find, which are radically new ways of thinking about our identity, about experience, about intersectionality, and so on. These mainstream notions of gender and culture will be interrogated by these different groups or different paradigms used by these critical approaches. So that's why all these critical approaches are important. And there are new ways of looking at gender also evident in the third world countries or the post-colonial feminists like Gayatri Chakrabarti Spivak, Chandra Talpare Mohembi. I know they all talk about difference and subalternity, oppression in a different flavor, in a different manner, a different level. Because in colonial, post-colonial countries, in the post-colonial era, the writings of women and the women writers, their experience are different. So you have got another set of theoretical framework and readings of, for example, this Maheshwara Devi's stories, which draw on the insights of feminism, Marxism, as well as deconstructionism to offer a powerful commentary on how gender is both formed and destabilized. In Draupadi Giver, Spivak uses the central metonymy where the body of woman represents colonized nation. So when a work from a post-colonial nation is used, is under study, it has got a different meaning to deconstruct and allegorize the interlocking and interwoven colonialism or traits of colonialism, race, class, and gender. So that is why we need these critical approaches, to foreground, to highlight, to reveal these hidden meanings, which are otherwise hidden, which will not come to the forefront. And we have many writers coming up in the Indian context, which are well documented by scholars like Partha Chatterjee, Uma Chakravarti, and so on. So, and moving on to this critical approaches. You have this in the modern era, with the advent of cultural studies. Again, there are many more theories that came up with, and also with the advent of these film studies, with the theories of Laura Mulvey's male gaze and how female bodies are objectified and how female bodies looked at, and who is the onlooker, and who is the spectator, and all those things came up with the advent of culture studies and film studies. So there is this one example where there is this critical approach to the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, and as well as from the cultural perspective, you have actually it is a story of an arrogant duke who killed his wife. Thinking that to preserve his love, he killed his wife, killed his wife, and gazing at the painting of his dead wife is the crux of the poem. And this poem constantly calls our attention to the controlling nature of male gaze, or how male gaze, or how a man gazes, how male gaze control everything. So the camera is, it's not, the gaze through, or the camera focuses, or camera sees through the male gaze. What is being portrayed or recorded is how the man wants to see. So that is, the main theory that runs in Laura Mulvey's essay, Male Gaze. And there's another essay as well by Laura Mulvey where she talks about the visual pleasure in the principles of visual pleasure. She talks about this male gaze and how this male gaze is used in almost all everywhere. You find that when you look at a picture or a movie or whatever, there is this example there. So this is also important. This is also an important critical approach to read a text in advertisements, in movies, where these female body is commodified. Female body is used to sell everything from cars to bathroom fittings. In certain ads, you find, for products which are exclusively used by men, women portray, half naked women portray. You remember, like I remember a poem by Kishwar Nahid called "I Am Not That Woman." This it's about how this female body is used to object commodify, and you'll read about this male gaze in next ones. We'll be talking about that in detail as well. And that is about different cultural critical approaches. And then there is this post-structuralism and the question of gender. So, with the advent of post-structuralism, with the theories of Michael Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Jean Lyotard, so these post-structuralist theorists, they put forward the idea that identities are created in and through language and discourse. So, in between, we actually touched upon this concept, how language is created, or language itself creates identity or a discourse, how these identities are created by language, how this reality is created with language. And later on, this Judith Butler and other theorists, they drew very heavily from this post-structuralism, and talks about, and this Judith Butler's works, they are important for gender studies as well. So, she has actually drawn much from post-structuralism and talked about the gendered body is performative. So, according to this post-structuralism, everything is constructed. Reality is constructed through our body. So here gender is constructed, and when we come to Judith Butler, she talks about gender as constructed, as being performative. It is constructed based on performance, based on performative. All right, so all right, so that is another set of theories brought up by Judith Butler, which are important as far as gender studies is concerned, about Foucault's history of sexuality and all this. They come to play. So these modern, postmodern feminist critics, they draw heavily upon all these post-structuralist writers, post-structuralist theories as well. And to be on a wider outlook, gender studies not only focus on women's writing and women's problems, but it expands and focuses its attention on construction of masculinities in different cultural and socio-historical contexts. Not only it's not confined just on feminism or femininity. It is on masculinities in general as well. All right. So coming to the last point, that is feminism and deconstruction. Deconstruction, it's a theory actually put forward by the post-structuralist Jacques Derrida. And what you have to understand is just the basic crux of deconstruction, or how meaning is deconstructed in the modern era in everyday usage. How a film, a novel, or some words are deconstructed within the framework of a critical approach. You deconstruct it based on Marxism, based on the feminist approach. You deconstruct, and then a new set of meanings come up. It is, it is not destruction or destroying something, destroying a narrative or a text. You deconstruct a text, a novel, and a new set of meanings come up. That is the main concept under main concept of deconstruction. It is this postmodern, post-structuralist technique of reading. This deconstruction is a postmodern, post-structuralist technique of reading a text, undermining or highlighting certain things which are hidden with the help of certain cultural critical approaches. So there are different theories, right from structuralism, new criticism of different ways of reading. So the first kind of reading is new criticism, where a close reading of the text is actually followed. The first way of reading, the critical approach, is reading a text. It's a closed reading. You have a text, and meaning is, just imagine there is a novel, and the meaning is in the novel. You don't have to look outside the novel. You don't have to go and look at the author. about the socio-economic political condition of the author. You don't have to take a look at the way he was living or something like that. Meaning is closed. The text is closed, organic, old, and the meaning is there. And if you make a close reading, close analysis of the novel or a poem, and you can these linguistic tools such as meter, rhythm, matter, all these literary tropes like symbols, matter, everything will help you decode the meaning, and you will be able to understand the meaning. That is the movement called new criticism or new critical reading. That is the approach where you find meaning within the text. Do you understand? The meaning is enclosed in the text. So the new critics like John Crow runs some. These are a few examples of new critics who formulated this way of reading a text. Alan Tate, then Northrop Frye, Cleander Brooks, so I.A. Richards. So these were the pioneers of this particular way of reading things, reading text. And then you have a structuralism in linguistics. It's another field of linguistics where Ferdinand de Saussure, who is a Swiss linguist, who introduced some radical concepts in his theory of study of language with the publication of his publication of this particular article, that is course in general linguistics. Here what we find is, he actually introduced this dual concept, this idea of signs as SIGN, signs, as being made of two different components, signifiers and signified. So what we read, when you read a novel, a text, there is a signified and a signifier. So there is a word here and it signifies, that is the signifier, and the signified is something different. For example, I think if I give you this example, it will be more clear. So for example, the dog, D-O-G. So when you write D-O-G, it is a signifier. D-O-G, the writing, the word D-O-G is a signifier which signifies to the actual object D-O-G, dog. That is the signified dog. So the signifier do not have any relation to that signified. Is there any? No, right? This DOG, the spelling has no connection whatsoever with the real dog, which barks and which can bite. So the signifier, that is the DOG, the sign, it actually has no connection. It will not bark, it will not bite. So it has no connection with it. So, this Ferdinand de Saussure came up with this new theory of signs, which comprises of signifier and signified. So what he was trying to say is that these signs do not have essences, or the signifier does not contain any meaning but points to something else. This DOG, the letters don't have any meaning. It it points to something else, and they are defined by a network of relations, signifiers and signifieds. And we can produce and convey meaning because we belong to a particular linguistic community, and we understand because we know language. If a person who doesn't know language, and if we use DOG, he will not relate DOG to the actual dog. I hope it is clear. So what he was trying to show is meaning is the result of a system of shared conventions, because we know we should be able to relate with the signs, and the relationship between signifiers and signifieds are arbitrary. There is no one-to-one connection with the word DOG and the animal DOG. And it's a very linguistic way of approaching a text, based on the study of signs and sign systems, which is later on called the semiotics, which will help us to read a text. And the structuralism as a literary theory, helps us to realize that the text meanings could not be created except in relation to other texts and conventions of reading. So, this is another approach. It's a structuralist approach to reading a particular text, right? How is it? How does it work? So, there is this literary text, a novel, and the meaning is not within the text. It is in relation to other texts and other conventions of reading. You find meaning in a particular text. A reader brings with himself or herself layers of past reading experience. You connect with previous novels or poems that you have read, and with which will all come into play. And similarly, the writers and poets are also influenced and by other poems and whatever things that they have already heard and listened to. And another literary text may refer to another work. So there is a novel here, and it is not there all of a sudden or all alone. So a particular work here, for example, Twelfth Night, it will have connections to the text that has already been there and text which will come afterwards as well. So it is not about being there always all alone. So meaning is always in relation with other signs and signifiers. So that is the main main concept of this method of reading a text, that is structuralism. And then the next, the third reading is post-structuralism, and deconstruction actually comes into in this. It is actually a post-structuralist way of reading a text. This deconstruction. So post-structuralism with writers like this Roland Barthes and other writers, we find that uh, text, there is a gradual shift from the over dependence on the systems and rules towards a much more playful and pleasureful attitude in literary criticism, because according to structuralism, meaning is always in relation to another text. There is a set of rules and other codes and signifiers and signifieds, and there is this one signifier points to another signifier and so on. But when we come to post-structuralism, the main concept that the critics talk about is that they say that while reading, they talk about this one point, and they drift away towards a more aesthetic discourse, which leans heavily on the notions of subversive pleasures, or there are certain hidden things, there are certain gaps, which will open up new ways of reading. So post-structuralism focuses on that, and deconstruction helps him to dismantle the traditional way of approach traditional meaning to get a new meaning for that, new meaning. And there is a certain terms that he brings up, Roland Barthes and others, they bring up, that is the jouissance, or the bliss, the ultimate bliss of you get while deconstructing a text. When a text is being deconstructed and new set of meanings explored based on post-structuralism, or based on your new way of reading it, you have this experience of jouissance, or pleasure, which you cannot actually relate to in normal ways, or when you normally read a text, such meanings will not come up. So it was Jacques Derrida who came up with concept of deconstruction, where the phonemes, the everything, it is dismantled. The meaning is this actually focus on three main things. One is meaning is the result of an infinite series of differences. According to structuralism, there is this connection between signifier and signified. But here, there is a series of differences. It is as if an arrow is being sent. So when the arrow is sent, the arrow moves, and the arrow is here, and again it moves here, it's here. You cannot say that the arrow is here. It is on move. So likewise, meaning is also is on move. You cannot say that. That is why this deconstruction is important. And you cannot fully say that this meaning is never fully present in a one sign. It's like an arrow which is passing, and this meaning is perpetually deferred like the arrow which passes. So you find this infinite play of differences in a particular text. And the word that he uses is, he introduces the new term difference. It is a difference plus deferral. It is deferment, difference as well as it is deferred. So from that, the new term comes, that is difference, where the meaning is always on move. And if you like keeping this in mind, if you read a text, the meaning is always moving. An explosion of moving takes meaning takes place. So instead, the tendency was to show various interpretations as equally valid. So it's not really just one interpretation which is valid. Any interpretation is valid because meaning is always on move, leading to pleasure in play, subjectivity, and plurality of interpretations. There is another concept: plural interpretations, multiple interpretations are possible. And so these are the main concepts that you have for that you can look into this concept, critical approach or deconstruction. All right, so this deconstruction comes to help in feminist reading, because in certain these feminist theorists, they use this deconstruction as a very strategic tool to make an analysis of literary text, because this loss of mastery of one dominant perspective and acknowledgement of plural perspectives. So as far as the literary text is concerned, this plural perspectives is important. So deconstruction actually gives scope for that, and undermining of the authority of knowing the subject by those at the margins. So, this dichotomy of the margin and what is in the main place is actually disrupted in post-structuralism. So, this now the one who is there in the margin gets the voice, and to get to know, get is privileged over the dominant one or the privileged male, and it helps to expose the tyranny of the law of the signifier by showing how it permits only certain representations while blocking others. And like in the arrow which passes, there are different representations. It is not that one signifies only one. There are different set of meanings attached to it, and it helps to undermine. This deconstruction helps feminism to undermine and expose logocentric and phallocentric discourses or male dominant discourses, where women in phallocentric discourses or discourses by men, women are considered to be the other, the secondary category, or something who is of no importance. So this other is spoken for but does not speak or represent herself. So in phallocentric discourses, these women were not allowed to speak, but here we find women giving an opportunity to speak and to represent herself. And deconstruction encourages a critique of hegemonic systems, especially patriarchal system. The patriarchal ideologies are also deconstructed in feminist narratives, and decentering the unitary, the center of the universe, where this patriarchal society is the center, the masculine subject is the center. So deconstruction tries to undermine this masculine subject and enables voices at the margin, that is the other, the woman is given the voice to be heard. So that is why this deconstruction is important as far as feminist critical approach is concerned. All right. So if you have any doubts, will be you can come up with your doubts if you have any. So these feminist approaches, critical approaches, again, they make use of deconstruction. The post-colonial feminist critics, African American feminist critics, French feminist critics, like Julia Kristeva, they all actually they have drawn heavily on post-structuralism and especially deconstruction for their critical approaches to read a critical text. Shall we wind up the class? Shall we wind up the class?
madam, yes, we can wind up, madam.
All right.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.